Good morning. I'm RJ Starr. And before we get started, I'd just like to let everybody know that we're going to be recording this lecture today and isolating the audio. But if you could please take a moment and make sure that your devices are powered in silent mode, I would appreciate it. This lecture is called The Myth of Replacement, What AI Really Takes from Us. All right, before we get started, I want to get a sense of the room. How many of you are under the age of 25? All right. All right, quite a few. How about between 25 and 40? Good. Still a strong group. How many of you are over 40? A few hands there too. Perfect. That mix actually matters for where we're going today because the fear of being replaced looks different depending on where you are in your life and career. Now, one more question. How many of you have already used AI in some way? Maybe ChatGPT, maybe image generators, maybe something built into your job? Yep, that's what I expected. That's what I expected. For some of you, AI is still enough to feel like a novelty. For others, it's already an uninvited coworker. And for a few of you, it's probably something you wish you could unlearn because it keeps reminding you of how easily the world moves on without our permission. That's really what I want to talk about today, the psychology behind this collective unease. Because when people say they're afraid AI will take their jobs, that's only half true. What they're really afraid of is being replaced, not economically necessarily, but existentially. They're afraid that what made them useful, relevant, or necessary will no longer matter. Let's take a concrete example. You've probably heard about AI systems that can detect depression or anxiety by analyzing speech patterns in therapy sessions. These tools can identify subtle tones and shifts, pauses, or inflections that even an experienced clinician might miss. They can predict mood disorders, generate progress notes, even offer treatment suggestions. And at first, that sounds impressive, almost miraculous. But the moment you think about it as a therapist or even as a patient, something uneasy happens. Because if a system can understand you without ever truly knowing you, what happens to the relationship? What happens to trust? For generations, therapy has been built on the premise that two human beings can sit across from each other and share something ineffable, the human capacity to care. But if an algorithm can imitate that care, can reflect empathy through data patterns, then the therapist's humanity begins to feel negotiable, right? Now, show of hands, how many of you are either studying or working in the fields of psychology, social work, or another field that relies heavily on human interaction? It could be customer service, law enforcement. Yeah, yes, a good portion of the room. You've probably already started to feel this tension. The world keeps telling you that human connection is irreplaceable, and yet it keeps finding ways to replicate it more efficiently. So let's pause here for a moment. Excuse me. The fear of being replaced isn't really new. It's part of a much older story about human identity. Every technological shift in history has triggered this same question. What am I if the thing I do can be done without me? When the printing press came along, scribes lost their calling. When cameras arrived, painters panicked. When industrial looms appeared, entire towns revolted. It's the same emotional logic every time. The moment a tool can do what we do, we question whether what we do even matters. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us were raised to believe that our value lies in our utility. We were taught that to matter is to be productive, to contribute, to fill a function. It's the story that defines nearly every educational system, every corporate ladder, every social hierarchy, which means the moment a machine can perform that function faster, cheaper, or with fewer emotional needs, our sense of worth trembles. That's why I say this is not an economic crisis, it's a psychological one. AI threatens the emotional scaffolding we built our identities on. We're not just afraid of losing income, we're afraid of losing significance. Let me ask you something else. Show of hands again. How many of you have at least once quietly wondered if your own job, your own expertise could be replaced by AI? Right? Nearly everyone. Now keep your hand up if you've ever thought it probably could, but I hope it won't. There it is. That's the human condition right now. We live with the cognitive dissonance of knowing we might be replaceable while desperately needing to believe we're not. And there's no shame in that. This anxiety comes from something deeply evolutionary. Throughout human history, survival depended on being needed by the group. If you weren't contributing, if you weren't useful, you were vulnerable. You could be excluded. And exclusion in our evolutionary past often meant death. That wiring hasn't disappeared just because we live in cities now. So when a machine begins to outperform us, the brain doesn't register that as innovation. It registers it as a threat. What AI has done in almost a clinical way is exposed just how fragile our sense of self really is. You see, we've wrapped so much of our identity around what we do that we've forgotten who we are. And when the doing becomes automated, the being suddenly feels hollow. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. The people who feel the most threatened by AI are often the ones who've invested the most in expertise. Those who've spent years mastering something, writing, designing, diagnosing, analyzing, because that mastery once guaranteed safety. And now the thing that once protected them has become the very thing being imitated. The poet, the therapist, the professor, they all find themselves looking at a mirror that can perform the gestures of intellect and emotion without ever feeling them. This, to me, is the real psychological injury of the AI era. It's not that machines are thinking, it's that we're realizing how much of our own thought, emotion, and creativity can be modeled. That realization feels like theft, but it's really revelation. It forces us to confront how much of human intelligence has always been predictable, patterned, conditioned, learnable. Excuse me. Let me ask you another question. One more show of hands. How many of you have been told at some point in your life that what makes you special is your human touch? That phrase, the human touch. A lot of you, most of you. That phrase, the human touch, comes up a lot, especially in service industries, teaching, healthcare, counseling. And it sounds lovely, doesn't it? Until you realize it's become a kind of consolation prize. We say it when we can't compete on speed or precision. The human touch is often code for slower, messier, more expensive. And yet it's also the one thing machines can't actually reproduce. That's what we need to hold on to, not defensively, but intentionally. Because the problem isn't that AI is getting smarter, it's that we've spent decades defining intelligence too narrowly. We've equated intelligence with output, with analysis, with function. And in doing so, we've ignored the very dimensions of humanity that resist automation: empathy, moral reasoning, curiosity, presence, conscience. And when I say presence, I mean the lived, felt experience of being in a room with someone, of noticing their eyes shift or their breath change or their tone falter. Machines can detect those things, but they can't inhabit them. They can't care that they noticed. And that distinction between noticing and caring will become one of the most important boundaries to protect in this century. Now that we've established the emotional logic of replacement fear, let's go deeper into the next layer. Because underneath the anxiety of what if the machine takes my job is a quieter, more personal fear. What if the machine takes my meaning? That's where I'm going now. We're going to look at how this isn't really about replacement at all. It's about displacement. What happens when technology doesn't remove us from the process, but from the center of it? the sense that we're no longer the main character in our own story. How many of you remember when smartphones first came out around the late 2000s? Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up if you got one, your first one, before 2010. Okay. Okay. Now, how many of you were still in school at the time? How many of you were still in high school at the time? Right. So now think back for a second. Do you remember what it felt like to realize that your attention wasn't really yours anymore? That it had become something companies were competing for? That was the first subtle displacement. You didn't vanish. You just stopped being the center of your own focus. What we're seeing with artificial intelligence today is the next stage of that same process. We are being displaced, not just from attention, but from authorship, from being the source of thought, creativity, interpretation. And the human psyche does not handle that gently. You see, for most of modern history, human beings assumed a kind of cognitive centrality. We believed that the mind was the measure of all things. Everything else in the world, animals, nature, machines, existed around that center. And that assumption created an emotional architecture that gave life meaning. We built religions, philosophies, and educational systems around the idea that thought, language, and creativity were the sacred domains of human existence. Then along comes a machine that writes symphonies, drafts legal briefs, and diagnoses illnesses all faster than we can. And suddenly the axis tilts. How many of you have ever asked an AI model a question and been a little bit shocked by how good the answer was? Maybe even felt a twinge of envy, right? That's displacement. It's not just surprise. It's the quiet recognition that something non-human has entered our territory. We've been through this before. When Copernicus showed that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, it didn't just change astronomy, it changed theology, identity, and humility. When Darwin showed that humans were part of evolution, rather than the pinnacle of it, it didn't just change biology, it changed our understanding of morality. And when Freud showed that our behavior was driven by unconscious forces rather than conscious reason, it didn't just change psychology, it changed our understanding of will. Now AI has arrived to complete the cycle. It's saying even your thinking isn't as central as you believed. The boundary between human and non-human cognition is not divine, it's porous. And that realization destabilizes the ego in profound ways. Let's pause here. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. How many of you have felt in the past year or so that your thoughts, your words, your creative impulses somehow feel less original than they used to? That you read something online or generate something with AI and think, that's what I was going to say, or close to what I was going to say. Right. Look around. Almost everybody in the room. That's not coincidence. That's what happens when the boundary between individual thought and collective simulation begins to dissolve. See, AI doesn't replace individuality. It dilutes it. It doesn't tell you what to think. It saturates the environment with pre-thought. And when everything around you begins to sound coherent, polished, and immediate, you start to question the value of your own messy process. This is the psychological cost of centrality loss, the very friction that used to define thinking, uncertainty, struggle, curiosity, starts to feel inefficient. And so we begin to outsource not just tasks, but tension. We let the system carry the discomfort of figuring things out. And over time, we lose the muscle memory of reflection. Let me bring this back to something very real. In psychotherapy, the healing process depends on something that we call affective attunement, the subtle dance of empathy, silence, and timing between therapist and client. Now imagine a machine that can listen to thousands of therapy sessions and learn what works emotionally, when to pause, when to reflect, when to offer validation. That system can reproduce the form of attunement perfectly, but not the experience of it. And yet, here's the paradox. Clients might actually prefer the imitation. Why? Because it's consistent. It's non-judgmental. It's available 24 hours a day. In other words, it offers all the comforts of human empathy with none of the unpredictability. Now think about what that means psychologically. When imitation begins to outperform authenticity on emotional reliability, we start to displace trust itself. We begin to redefine intimacy as consistency and connection as convenience. And that redefinition ripples outward to education, to leadership, to relationships, even your self-concept. How many of you honestly have ever felt closer to a screen than to a person? Maybe through music, a film, or even a message thread that somehow understood you more than someone in the same room. Don't be shy. Show me your hands. It's most of us. It's most of us. That's displacement in its quietest, most seductive form. It's not being replaced by a machine. It's letting the machine mediate what connection even means. This is why I keep saying that the AI revolution isn't just technical, it's psychological. It's not that machines are doing new things. It's that they're doing old human things in ways that reveal how mechanized we already are. There's a phrase in developmental psychology, object constancy. It's the ability to maintain an emotional bond with someone even when they're not physically present. Babies develop it when they realize that a caregiver still exists even after leaving the room. What we're witnessing now is a breakdown of symbolic constancy. Our relationships, our attention, our sense of relevance, all depend on constant feedback. If we're not seen, we vanish. If we're not producing, we fade. AI systems exploit that fragility perfectly. They offer endless affirmation, endless completion, endless mirrors. But mirrors don't love us back. Now here's the irony. AI didn't create this problem. It inherited it. Long before algorithms learned to write essays, we were already living in systems that measured human worth by visibility and efficiency. Social media trained us to equate engagement with importance. Productivity culture trained us to equate exhaustion with value. And education systems trained us to equate achievement with identity. AI didn't invent those distortions. It simply automated them. So if you ever catch yourself thinking AI is taking over everything, pause and remember, it's not taking over. It's finishing the job we started. We built the scaffolding of automation into our emotional lives long before the code existed. The machines just made it undeniable. Now let me circle back to that word, centrality. Losing it feels like death, but it's really an invitation to maturity, because every time humanity loses its place at the center of the universe, it grows up a little. We become more aware of context, more aware of interdependence, more aware that we are participants in a system, not masters of it. That's the opportunity here, my friends, not to claw our way back to the center, but to redefine what it means to exist in a world where the center itself has dissolved. We can either see that as humiliation or as liberation. So now that we've laid this groundwork, I want to move us towards something that's even more unsettling, but also more hopeful. The question of what happens when the systems we've built begin to take over the emotional functions of meaning, not just tasks, not just attention, but the actual architecture of purpose. So we've talked about replacement, we've talked about displacement. Now we need to talk about something quieter, but far more destabilizing: the loss of coherence. Now, if you follow me online, if you take my classes, you'll hear me talk about coherence a lot. Because once you're no longer the center of a system, the next question becomes, what is the system even for? When you can no longer locate your worth in being useful, what becomes the anchor of your identity? Let's start with a question, and I want you to actually think about this before you raise your hand. How many of you would say that your sense of value, your feelings of self-worth, still comes primarily from your productivity, from getting things done, from feeling efficient, from knowing you're contributing something immeasurable? Okay, that's a lot of hands, almost the whole room. Now, how many of you would say that your sense of worth comes more from who you are than what you do? Hmm, interesting. Only a few. And that right there tells us something profound about the human condition in 2025. For most people, worth is still transactional. It's earned through contribution, achievement, usefulness, and AI disrupts that at the root. Because once productivity, accuracy, and even creativity can be automated, the old questions that once governed self-esteem stop working. The same culture that told us, work hard and you'll matter, is now whispering, the machine works harder. And that's not just an insult to our labor, it's a crisis for our meaning system. Every civilization builds its psychological stability on a shared story of what makes life worthwhile. For centuries, that story was labor, that through work we express our virtue, our purpose, our dignity. It's the Protestant work ethic, the industrial work ethic, the self-help work ethic. Work became a moral narrative, not just an economic one. And in that narrative, usefulness was sacred. But automation is severing that link. It's turning work into a system of function rather than fulfillment. And when that happens, a civilization begins to lose its moral language for worth. Let me make this more tangible. Think of all the phrases we use to express dignity: earning a living, paying your dues, making a contribution. Every one of them is anchored in labor. Now imagine a world where labor is optional for survival, but still necessary for meaning. That's where we're heading. A world where people aren't working to live, but living to feel like they matter. Now, show of hands. How many of you have ever felt uneasy after taking a long break from work? Hmm. Maybe you started feeling useless, unanchored, even guilty about taking time off. Exactly. That's not laziness talking, that's conditioning. We've been psychologically trained to equate constant output with moral worth. And this is where AI presses on our deepest insecurities. Because AI doesn't rest, it doesn't need sleep, reassurance, or meaning, it just performs. It makes human fragility visible: the pauses, the doubts, the self questioning. And when we compare ourselves to something that never falters, our own humanness starts to look like a flaw instead of a feature. The great irony here is that we built machines to make our lives easier, but what they're really making visible is how much of our identity was never built to survive ease. We are psychologically calibrated for struggle. We grow through friction, not frictionlessness. And when everything becomes effortless, meaning collapses. You can see this happening in small ways already. A student uses AI to write a paper, and even if it's technically perfect, it feels hollow. Something feels hollow. A designer uses an image generator and feels detached from the final product. A writer co-creates with AI and can't quite tell if the idea still belongs to them. That hollow feeling, it's not about cheating. It's about alienation. It's the disconnection between effort and ownership. We've always assumed that value emerges from output, but value actually emerges from investment. An investment, whether emotional, intellectual, or moral, investment requires time, tension, and the possibility of failure. AI removes those ingredients. It gives us the outcome without the journey, and the result is psychological malnutrition. Here's something that may surprise you. In many psychological studies, people report higher satisfaction from difficult tasks than from easy ones. The brain links struggle to meaning. It's why finishing a marathon feels better than winning a game of chance. It's not the result that fulfills us, it's the process that shapes us. AI collapses process into instant output. And that speed, though seductive, begins to erode our tolerance for depth. We get used to the illusion that understanding can happen as fast as information, but that's not how the mind, or soul, if you prefer that word, develops. Understanding is metabolized slowly through reflection, through frustration, through re engagement. The machine doesn't need that. We do. And that's the next frontier of the crisis. Because as the pace of automation accelerates, humans are being asked to emotionally function at machine speed. We're being conditioned to keep up, to adapt, to stay relevant. But relevance at the speed of code is not relevance at the speed of life. It's a performance, and it's exhausting. Excuse me. Let me ask you another question. How many of you have felt at least once that you can't keep up with the world, that everything feels like it's moving faster than you can emotionally process? I think everyone in the room has their hand up here. That sense of overwhelm isn't a personal failure. It's a natural reaction to living inside a system that's evolving faster than human nervous systems were designed to handle. And this is what I mean when I say our value systems are fragile. They're built on assumptions from the industrial age: linear effort, measurable output, incremental progress. But we're living in an exponential environment. The math no longer works. And here's the subtle danger. When meaning collapses, people don't stop seeking it. They just start borrowing it from shallower sources. When you can't derive purpose from creation, you'll derive it from consumption. When you can't feel unique through contribution, you'll try to feel unique through identity, outrage, or visibility. That's what we're seeing across culture. The replacement of achievement-based identity with attention-based identity. The tragedy is that both are unsustainable. Attention fades, outrage burns out, and identity politics can't fill the void of meaning. So people cycle through self-definitions, trying to find something solid to stand on, only to realize that solidity itself has become rare in an economy of speed. AI amplifies all of this. It's the perfect accelerator for an already unstable system. It doesn't destroy value systems directly. It quietly reveals how hollow they've become. It forces us to see that the stories we told ourselves about worth and purpose were never psychologically resilient. They were contingent on scarcity. But scarcity is disappearing. Knowledge, access, creativity, they're all being democratized by automation. So the new scarcity, ironically, is authentic interiority, the ability to think, feel, and discern without outsourcing. That's the beginning of our way forward. Because when systems of external validation start collapsing, and they will, the only stable value system left is internal. It's not what you produce, it's how consciously you exist. We'll spend the rest of this lecture talking about just that, how to rebuild a sense of self that doesn't depend on being the fastest, the smartest, or the most efficient. We'll talk about how to become psychologically irreplaceable in an age where almost everything can be replaced. So take a breath for a moment. We've talked about fear, we've talked about displacement, and now we've seen how fragile the scaffolding of meaning can be when the world stops needing our output. The question that remains is how we reclaim agency, how we evolve from the psychology of productivity to the psychology of presence. In other words, the art of becoming consciously irreplaceable. Can I get a bottle of water, please? Now, before we go any further, let me ask something simple. Show of hands. How many of you feel that in the last year you've become more reactive? That you check the news or your phone or the notifications on autopilot even before you even decide whether you care? Almost everyone. Almost everyone. Thank you. That's the first place agency disappears. Not when someone takes it from us, but when we give it away so frequently that we forget what it feels like to choose. We've been told that AI is a technological revolution. I think it's really a psychological one. It's forcing us to ask, if the machines can handle the thinking, what's left for the mind? And my answer is simple: everything that can't be automated. Consciousness, conscience, curiosity, and connection. Let's start with consciousness. Human consciousness is not just the ability to process information. It's the ability to experience awareness of awareness. It's that reflective loop that lets you step outside of yourself, observe, evaluate, and redirect. Machines can simulate reflection, but they can't own it. They can't decide what matters or why. So reclaiming agency begins here with awareness, the daily act of noticing what you're being trained to ignore. Take a moment and think about this. How many times a day do you interact with an algorithm? Scrolling, listening, searching, buying, without consciously deciding to engage? 10 times? 20? 50? More? Each one is a microtransaction of attention, and attention is the currency of selfhood. Every time you give it away without intention, you lose a little agency. So step one is simple but radical. Deliberate noticing. When you scroll, know you're scrolling. When you listen, know you're listening. When you create, know you're creating. That awareness interrupts the automation loop. It says, this moment is mine again. I've chosen it. The second dimension is conscience. Conscience is what turns knowledge into ethics. It's what reminds you that capability does not equal permission. AI has given us power without proportional maturity. It has made it possible to generate truth and falsehood with equal ease. So agency now means moral discernment. The courage to slow down and ask, should I? Before you ask, can I? Show of hands. How many of you have ever used AI to write something, a message, a paper, a caption, and felt just slightly uneasy about whether it was still yours? Right. That's your conscience speaking. It's not guilt. It's the awareness that the line between tool and substitution is thin, and crossing it without thought weakens integrity. Reclaiming agency means keeping that moral discomfort alive. It's proof that you are still steering the ship. The third dimension is curiosity. Curiosity is how the mind resists stagnation. It's not about seeking novelty. It's about seeking depth. AI systems are built to produce closure, clear answers, finished outputs, completed thoughts. But human beings don't thrive on closure. We thrive on exploration. A question that stays open inside you for a week will teach you more than 1,000 generated summaries. This is why true curiosity feels restless. It's the willingness to sit with ambiguity. So when a machine offers a fast answer, pause and ask, What's the question beneath that question? That one gesture reestablishes your ownership of thought. It reminds you that understanding is an act of participation, not consumption. Now let's talk about connection, the last and most endangered frontier. Connection used to mean presence. It used to mean sitting with someone and feeling their mood shift, their posture soften, their guard drop. But as interactions migrate to screens, connection is turning into contact. Frictionless, low stakes, algorithmically optimized contact. I want to see hands for this one. How many of you have felt lonely even while constantly communicating online? Again, everyone in the room. That's because connection has become abundant but thin. And just like calories without nutrients, abundance without depth leaves you starved. So reclaiming agency in the relational sense means slowing down enough to feel each other again. It means remembering that empathy isn't efficient. It's costly. It takes time, attention, patience, emotional risk. Machines can mimic compassion, but they can't absorb the weight of another person's reality. Only human beings can do that. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice that all four of these, consciousness, conscience, curiosity, and connection, share one trait. They require slowness. Agency grows in the spaces that efficiency erases. Every shortcut the world offers, instant answers, instant validation, instant output, saves time, but steals depth. And the future will belong to those who choose depth. Now let's make this practical. If the old value system collapsed because usefulness defined identity, then the new value system must be built on presence. Presence is not passivity. It's active participation in your own awareness. It's the ability to stay awake to experience even when it's uncomfortable. In psychological terms, it's differentiation, the capacity to stay yourself in the presence of pressure, speed, and simulation. So how do you practice it? Start by creating intentional friction. Do one thing the long way each day. Write by hand. Think without typing. Walk without earbuds. It's not nostalgia. It's neural recalibration. The mind learns what matters through effort. Effort creates memory, and memory creates meaning. Next, cultivate interior space. The digital environment rewards constant expression, but punishes reflection. Silence feels unnatural because we've been trained to fill it. But silence is where integration happens. The moment between stimuli and response, that's where agency lives. If you can expand that space, you can reclaim your autonomy no matter how fast the world moves. How many of you find silence uncomfortable? That discomfort is exactly where the work begins. The same nervous you feel in silence is the same nervousness people feel when they realize they can no longer hide behind busyness or output. Silence is the sound of selfhood resurfacing. Finally, we need to redefine progress itself. We've spent centuries equating progress with expansion, more knowledge, more production, more speed. But psychological progress has always been about integration, knowing when to stop, when to rest, when to say no. AI can help us scale. It can't help us mature. That's our responsibility. So if you want to remain fully human in an automated world, you must practice psychological maturity as a discipline. It's the willingness to hold paradox, to see AI as both a threat and a teacher, to feel awe and anxiety at the same time, to adapt without abandoning essence. That is what separates imitation from authenticity. Not output, but awareness. So as we close, I want to leave you with one final image. Imagine you're standing in front of a mirror that reflects not your appearance, but your mind, your habits, your attention, your fears, your desires. Now imagine that mirror belongs to the machine. It reflects perfectly, but feels nothing. What you do with that reflection is your test of agency. You can stare at it until you disappear, or you can look through it, and begin to see yourself again. Artificial intelligence will never truly replace us, but it will continue to tempt us to replace ourselves, to trade awareness for efficiency, integrity for convenience, meaning for momentum. Reclaiming agency means refusing that trade. It means staying awake inside the noise. So before you leave today, I want you to think about this. What part of you can't be automated? What part of you still requires presence, vulnerability, and care? That's your true work now. That's what the machines will never be able to touch. I'm RJ Starr. Thank you for your time and attention today and for giving me this platform to share a few ideas with you.